For nearly 2 years, a young California technology entrepreneur named Chris Smith was living the ultimate dream. According to a steady stream of emails and text messages sent to his family, he had walked away from the corporate grind, bought a luxury yacht, and was spending his days drinking and sailing his way across the remote waters of South America. His parents could track his global journey one message at a time. But while these digital updates painted a picture of absolute paradise, a private investigator hired to look into a completely unrelated business dispute walked into a deserted office building in Carlsbad, California. There were no yachts, no tropical beaches, and no signs of success. Just an empty suite, an unpaid rent bill, and a dark, hidden stain soaking deep into the floorboards that changed everything. Just a quick heads up before the story begins. Every single name, location, and piece of evidence you're about to hear is completely real, taken directly from public federal court transcripts and official police records. None of the details have been fictionalized or altered for drama. Because of the serious nature of these real-world events, viewer discretion is advised as we walk through the exact steps of the case. The investigation began with a routine property dispute over a deserted office space in a business park in Carlsbad, California. In the spring of 2012, a landlord was trying to track down a tenant who had abruptly vanished, leaving behind thousands of dollars in unpaid rent. The lease belonged to a digital marketing and search engine optimization company. When the landlord hired a private investigator to look into the abandoned suite on Aston Avenue, the investigator expected to find empty desks, leftover paperwork, or electronic waste. Instead, as he walked through the quiet, stripped-down office rooms, he noticed dark, suspicious stains on the walls and carpeting. Realizing the physical evidence pointed to a violent struggle rather than a simple business failure, the investigator immediately contacted the Carlsbad Police Department. When patrol officers and forensic technicians arrived at the scene, they treated the office as an active crime scene. The room had been thoroughly cleaned, but the perpetrator had done an imperfect job. Forensic investigators utilized Bluestar and luminol, chemical solutions that react with iron found in hemoglobin to reveal trace amounts of blood that are invisible to the naked eye under normal lighting. When the technicians sprayed the chemical agent across the walls, baseboards, and floorboards, the empty office began to glow with vibrant blue patterns. The patterns revealed a massive amount of blood splatter that had soaked deep into the drywall, underneath the baseboards, and through the carpet padding into the concrete subfloor. Technicians carefully scraped samples of the dried fluid from the walls, cut out sections of the contaminated carpet, and sent the biological evidence to a forensic laboratory for DNA profiling, which involves extracting genetic material to create a unique statistical identifier. While waiting for the laboratory results, detectives began a missing persons investigation to determine who had been working in the office. They discovered that the business, a company named 800 Power, was a joint venture operated by two partners. One partner was a 34-year-old technology entrepreneur named Chris Smith, and the other was a 31-year-old business executive named Edward Shin. Neighbors and family members of Chris Smith revealed that no one had physically seen Chris since June 2010, nearly 2 years prior. However, his family insisted that he could not be dead because they had been receiving regular emails and text messages from him for many months. According to these electronic messages, Chris had abruptly decided to leave the corporate world behind, liquidate his shares in the marketing company, buy a luxury yacht, and embark on a solo sailing trip around the globe. The timeline did not make sense to investigators. The blood in the Carlsbad office appeared old, but it strongly suggested a major life-threatening injury had occurred on the premises. Detectives interviewed Chris Smith's family to examine the electronic messages more closely. The family explained that in June 2010, Chris had allegedly sent an email stating he was selling his half of the business to Edward Shin for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Shortly thereafter, the emails described a lavish lifestyle of traveling through South America, drinking heavily, and sailing across the Pacific Ocean. But detectives noted several anomalies. The writing style in the later emails lacked Chris's usual grammatical habits, used slang he never previously used, and consistently offered excuses for why he could not speak over a live telephone line or a video call. The emails claimed his satellite phone had poor reception, or that he was in a remote port with no cellular service. A breakthrough occurred when the forensic laboratory completed the DNA analysis on the blood found in the Carlsbad office. The genetic profile matched the reference DNA provided by Chris Smith's parents. The sheer volume of blood found beneath the floorboards indicated that the individual who lost it could not have survived without immediate, intensive medical intervention. Because hospitals and emergency rooms had no record of treating Chris Smith in June 2010, detectives upgraded the case from a missing persons investigation to a homicide inquiry. Chris Smith was dead, and someone had spent the last 2 years actively using his electronic accounts to impersonate him and cover up his murder. With Chris Smith identified as the victim, investigators turned their attention to his business partner, Edward Shin. They began a comprehensive financial audit and digital forensics examination of Edward Shin's life. unlocking a history of deception, extreme debt, and corporate theft. Investigators discovered that before meeting Chris Smith, Shin had worked at a tech advertising firm called L90, which later became Maximize. Shin had risen through the ranks to become the company president. During his tenure there, he had systematically embezzled more than $1 million from the company. Shin had accomplished this by establishing fake vendor accounts and diverting legitimate client payments into his personal bank accounts. When the financial investigators tracked where that embezzled money went, the trail led directly to major casinos in Las Vegas, Nevada. Shin was a severe gambling addict who frequently lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in single weekend streaks. The high-stakes gambling was so significant that Las Vegas casinos treated him as a high-roller VIP, providing him with luxury suites, free fine dining, and private jet transportation to keep him coming back. In 2009, his corporate embezzlement scheme collapsed when a company associate spotted Shin gambling with massive sums of money in Las Vegas that did not align with his official salary. A subsequent internal audit exposed the theft, leading to Shin's arrest by law enforcement. To avoid a lengthy prison sentence, Shin signed a legal plea agreement that placed him on commercial probation and ordered him to pay roughly $700,000 in restitution to his former employer. The legal terms of this probation were strict. If Shin missed his scheduled restitution payments, his probation would be revoked, and he would be sentenced to several years in state prison. Detectives realized that Edward Shin was under immense financial pressure in May and June of 2010. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to the state for his restitution plea deal, he owed substantial debts to Las Vegas casinos, and his new business venture with Chris Smith, 800 Power, was one of his only sources of income. Digital forensics experts then audited the internal business records of 800 Power and discovered that Chris Smith had recently uncovered Shin's criminal history. Upon learning that his business partner was a convicted felon who had embezzled over $1 million from a previous employer, Chris Smith became deeply concerned about the safety of his own capital and the legitimacy of their joint operations. Chris hired a corporate attorney and filed an official legal demand to dissolve the partnership, demanding a payout of approximately $1 million to exit the company. This legal demand placed Edward Shin in an impossible position. He did not have $1 million to pay Chris Smith, and if Chris proceeded with a lawsuit, a court-ordered review of 800 Power's finances would expose that Shin was already siphoning money from their current clients to pay off his old restitution debts. A secondary audit would violate his probation and send him directly to prison. Investigators now had a clear, powerful motive. Shin needed Chris Smith to disappear to stop the legal dissolution of the company, protect his freedom, and gain total control of the remaining corporate funds. To prove how the crime was committed, investigators subpoenaed internet service providers and tech companies to trace the geographic location data of the emails sent from Chris Smith's account after his disappearance. Digital forensics analysts isolated the internet protocol addresses, the unique digital labels assigned to devices connected to a network used to send the messages. The data revealed that the emails supposedly sent by Chris from a yacht in the Pacific Ocean or an internet cafe in Peru were actually being transmitted from networks inside the United States. Specifically, many of the emails were traced back to the regional internet networks directly utilized by Edward Shin at his home and his office. Furthermore, financial records showed that immediately after Chris disappeared, Shin began writing checks from Chris Smith's personal bank accounts, forging his signature to drain his remaining funds. Shin had also drafted a fraudulent business contract stating that Chris had agreed to sell his share of 800 Power for a mere $45,000 instead of the $1 million he had originally demanded. Shin then used Chris's email account to send messages to Chris's own attorney stating that the legal dispute was settled and that no further legal actions were necessary. In September 2011, as investigators gathered enough circumstantial and physical evidence to secure an arrest warrant, they learned that Edward Shin was attempting to board a commercial flight out of Los Angeles International Airport bound for Canada. Fearing he was attempting to flee the country to escape prosecution, police intercepted Shin at the airport and took him into custody. During his initial police interrogations, Shin attempted to maintain the narrative that Chris Smith was alive and traveling the world. However, when detectives confronted him with the DNA laboratory results proving that Chris's blood covered the office walls, along with the digital IP tracking evidence linking the global emails to Shin's own computer, Shin's story broke down. He changed his defense, admitting to detectives that Chris Smith was dead, but claiming the death was an accident. Shin alleged that during a heated argument in the office regarding the business buyout, Chris had become aggressive. Shin claimed that he fought back in self-defense, causing Chris to fall backward, hit his head on a desk, and die from the impact. When detectives asked why there was blood splatter across multiple walls, if it was a simple fall, and where Chris's body was located, Shin refused to provide clear answers. He admitted that he panicked after the death, loaded Chris's body into the back of a vehicle, and drove out into the remote desert areas of California to dispose of it. Despite extensive law enforcement searches using forensic recovery teams and cadaver dogs throughout the desert terrain, Chris Smith's physical remains were never located. The case proceeded to a criminal trial in the San Diego County Superior Court, where prosecutors presented a mountain of physical, financial, and digital evidence to the jury. The prosecution argued that the crime was a premeditated murder motivated entirely by greed and financial self-preservation. Forensic experts testified that the high-velocity blood splatter patterns found in the Carlsbad office were completely inconsistent with a simple accidental fall, demonstrating instead a sustained, violent attack using a sharp or heavy object. The digital forensics team presented the IP address logs, proving to the jury that Shin had spent nearly 2 years manufacturing an elaborate digital ghost to deceive a worried family and stall a homicide investigation. The prosecution showed that while Chris's family was grieving and wondering why he refused to call them, Shin was actively logging into his dead partner's inbox to type out false updates about sailing the world. The defense argued that without a body, the state could not definitively prove the exact mechanism of death, maintaining that the incident was an escalation of manslaughter rather than first-degree murder. However, the jury found the digital deception, the cleanup of the crime scene, the financial motive, and the forensic blood evidence overwhelming. In December 2018, the jury convicted Edward Shin of first-degree murder for financial gain. At his sentencing hearing, the judge noted the extraordinary cruelty involved in impersonating a deceased victim to his own parents for years. Edward Shin was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated for the murder of his business partner.